Hello and welcome to Sunday Club. It's Sunday morning, it's 4th of October, and this is a weekly live stream where we take a look at live streaming and live coding, some Ruby on Rails, particularly aimed at people that are learning or that are just interested in Ruby on Rails in general. And so each week we are building an app along together, and we are going to look at different features and then see how a learner might approach them in different ways, and kind of get a sense of just that next step on for learners after they've done their initial tutorials, maybe a boot camp, something like that. Just start to look at some of the questions that we see around the web, whether it's something like Reddit or dev.to or Stack Overflow or something like that, and then kind of come back to our app. So still in the early days, so we're looking at some fairly kind of different things as we have been going along. But we're gradually starting to get our app together, and then this week we can hopefully take a look at our first kind of like learner question. So let's get started. I'm just going to check that the audio is coming through, which I do every week. Yep, that's my voice. So cool. We think something is working. Cool. Okay, so I want to do in this week, I want to do kind of three things, I think, which is the first one is some follow-up just to the little rabbit hole that we went down at the start of last week's episode, and round that off because I did go and do some just a little bit of work to follow that up during the week. The next thing I want to do is take a look at, basically pick up where we left off on answering that question of admin functionality and where that can live, and kind of how that can work at a fairly high level. Don't want to get too far into the weeds with that because we're not going to build it out just yet, but I do want to look at how we're going to approach that because it's really the next big thing that I want to look at once we've worked out what the app functionality is, and then look at kind of just tidying up the work in progress, because we originally, back in the channel's history, if you go back, there's a video where we did a bunch of work in progress commits, and then we then went back and did a homework edition where we rebased them all in. So you take a look back for that in the channel, which I think is kind of fairly standard of something that I do a lot. Last week what we did is just did the work, and I didn't commit as I go, so we ended up with things that we do want, things that we don't want, and just a little bit of a mess. And I thought we could take a look at how we might tidy that up if we haven't been committing as we go, which we should really do. So let's jump straight in, really. Let me jump over to the code, and hopefully we can get started. So let's take a look at what we've got here. Okay, so on the screen at the moment we've got the kind of show view that we had for our channels. If you remember, what we're building is like an app for this channel and for other video channels. So we're basically going to have the models that we've got at the moment is an organization which can have many channels, and then we're going to allow a channel to have many videos or streams or things like that. And that's about as far as we've got so far. And so we built out, last week, we built out our kind of basic CRUD functionality, create, read, update, and destroy. So we can now edit our channel, and we have our title field here, and then the description field, which is, they work. So you can say, add an exclamation mark here, press that, and you'll see, we also had our flash message here, and they get updated. So we now have two exclamation marks on here. So simple, basic CRUD functionality. And at the end of last week, we added in this idea of having a is suspended or suspended out or something like that. And we want to look at where admins can update that. I just want to do my follow-up first. And the follow-up is, you might notice that this now uses our custom font. So we're using Tailwind CSS for this project, mainly because I was interested in it. And I did go through we had gone down a bit of a rabbit hole trying to get our custom font working last week, and it didn't work. So I did just a little bit of follow-up on that. If I bring my editor up, pull it over. So we weren't a million miles off on the thing that we had found on Stack Overflow, I think. So basically, Sophia Pro is the custom font that we've got, and I have added it to this tailwind.config.js, and it now does work. And the other question I then had is how we basically apply basic styles to things like headers, so heading 1, heading 2, and just kind of other HTML elements. So the config here wasn't working. One of the things that I found is that whatever implementation of Tailwind we set up using Rails bytes, again, you have to go back in the stream to take a look at that if you're interested. I have had to restart the server every time I've changed this config. I don't know if that's correct or not, but that is what I've had to do. So maybe that was one of the issues we had when we tried it the first time. Also, I think we didn't have sans here. I think we had base and then tried to apply that base class to the HTML element or the body element on the in our application layout. That didn't work either, but I'm not sure whether the font styles did change, but they weren't then cascading down. But either way, adding it to sans then made it work, which I think is the kind of root of what Tailwind is using. And then in answer to the kind of how do you get this working without having to kind of add the CSS class to each one, it adds this layer. I actually don't know where that layer is coming from. Like, is that a Tailwind thing, or is that a... Yeah, I think that's a Tailwind thing. So which I guess is why we're getting a linting error on it, but it did work. So I'm guessing that sorry, I'm just getting messages from my sister. I'm guessing that that's something proprietary that Tailwind is doing, and it's processing our Sass for us and reading that out. So I don't know if there's like a different linter that we could have, something like that. But either way, this does work. So as you apply this @apply, I think is from Tailwind as well, and then these are the built-in rules from Tailwind. And then so if we change this to what do we got here? Text to Excel. If we change it to text, just a really large one, text for Excel. Let's swap that out. Cool. And then come back and refresh. And we should see this is our H1. We should see that grow in size when we refresh. It's a little bit slow. I'm guessing the Webpack is having to do a full recompilation at that point in development mode. So I'm guessing that's churning out a lot of new CSS with that change in. Yep, so that font is now larger. I don't know, and I'm not going to commit to looking this week whether there is a quick way to do that, because it does work for now. So you can see everything's in a nice new font, and then we can use the standard classes that Tailwind gives us and is their preferred way of working, which is this utility-based add classes, don't customize stuff. But now we can add our base layer of CSS here to influence that. So we can kind of set those styles up in here. And I think then you can do in the config, you can basically go in and override their values if you want, so colors, whatever you want. So that's just a default config. So that now makes more sense to me. I was getting a little bit lost in there, so I did spend some time. It wasn't a huge amount of time, so if you are interested, it hasn't put me off using it particularly. I think it's an interesting approach to CSS frameworks in general, and I was interested in it more specifically because I want to look at using something like Stimulus Reflex or something like that, and sending maybe HTML over the wire rather than React components. And I was interested if the HTML over the wire already has, like, is it easier to work with when you can see its CSS classes as to what you think should happen, rather than having to kind of abstract those out in like a BEM syntax or something like that. Okay, so that's the follow-up. So that all works and we don't need to worry about it, but it is not committed. The other bit of follow-up is I said I was going to go and get the GitHub app, which I did. So that should hopefully load up here. Of course, then this one you can adjust the font size, which was the issue we had using source tree. The downside seems to be that I'm not sure whether we get our lovely branch view, but we'll find out when we make a couple of branches. You only get the one you're working on. You don't get that kind of like lovely forking view. Or maybe you do, I just haven't found it yet. So you can see we've got a bunch of changes from last week, and we're going to go and carry on. I'm going to kind of make a bit of a headache for myself just to see how we can commit these. And the other bit of follow-up is, so we've got this Tailwind CSS stuff installed the GitHub UI. Again, this is just another app that we can use on top of terminal. It's all the same Git under the hood, they're just different apps. And the third thing is that I just remembered it and it's completely slipped out of my mind. I'm sure it'll come back to me. Super annoying. My brain diverges too much. Okay, cool. So let's take a look at what we want to do next, which is where we got to with our admin functionality. Oh, I remember the third thing I was going to say. I have added the chapters to the other YouTube videos, so hopefully they'll be a little bit easier to follow. You can see them in the little YouTube scrubber thing along the bottom, and also you can read roughly what's in them, so you don't have to kind of click around to see what's going on. You can just jump straight to the part of the video that you have someone's told you about or that you can find useful. So yeah, hopefully that makes things a bit easier. I don't think I've done all of them yet, but I'll go back and I'll do this one straight after this video. Just because it's easier to do it when it's fresh in my memory. Cool, that's all of the follow-up. Let's take a look at admin functionality. Now, if we refresh our memories, last week we had this new attribute suspended. Actually, let's do it in terminal window. Nice and colorful so we can see. Bump that font size right up. And let's just open a Rails console up. So we had, I think it was on our channel. Cool. Okay, so we had our channel, and our channel has this new attribute of suspended at. And what we had discussed was we've added an update, a form with which you can update the channel, and it lets you change a bunch of these attributes. But we only want admins to be able to administrate suspended at. And when they set the timestamp on suspended at, it will become suspended. Cool. So what we are interested in doing is giving admins a place where they can administrate this value. And I threw a few options in at the end of last week, and I want to just go back over them. And I want to say a few things up front, just for anyone who has, if I reference this when I'm talking to a learner in the future or something like that. I'm not advocating for any of these specific approaches. We are going to implement one, which may or may not be one that we like, and we can change it later, but we are going to implement one of them at some point. So I'm not advocating for any of them specifically. There's no one right answer, which is often I've found whenever I'm learning something new, you're often casting around for the right approach, which often there isn't a right or wrong, there are just different approaches. And then the other thing is that as you gain more experience in either your Rails journey, your development journey, or your career journey, as you gain more experience, the thing I found is that what you often gain is just a little bit more, maybe confidence isn't maybe not the right word, but some sort of confidence. You're like, well, okay, I've assessed a few different options here. I'm going to try one and see how I feel about it. And you kind of just start to learn to trust your own sense of those things just a little bit more. So we're going to take a look at some options, and you might then look at 10 different code bases and see things like this done 10 different ways, and you can just kind of learn to kind of look for things that you like and don't like about it, and gradually you'll bump into things where you're like, oh, that didn't work too well over in this code base because something went wrong, and you can start to apply those lessons a bit more widely. Just on a note about that, I think that's why I'm interested in making a channel like this, just because so many tutorials are like, this is how to do X, when in reality that's actually very unlikely in a day-to-day coding environment, because you often have a choice. You have some authority as to how you're going to implement something. So you're actually like, how am I actually going to approach this, rather than like, I want to do X. The tutorials are super useful to learn and really useful if you know the implementation you're going for all of those things. But it's that initial part of like, how do I begin to approach this? Or in Rails, where does this live? So let's take a look at some of the approaches that we talked about last time. So when I think they are still here. Okay, cool. I left them in. No, I didn't actually write the code up. Okay, so I left the files around, but didn't leave the code. Okay, so we've got our channel as controller, or at the moment we're doing our update action. And if you remember, that's where we said you can update the name and the description at the moment. Those are the only permitted fields, and that is powering this form. So that's where this form submits to this action, it updates the channel, and everything goes great, and you go back to the channel view. We don't, I was going to say we don't want to. One option you have is you could update the suspended value here, but only for admins. So something, one of the things we discussed last week, and if you watch the end of last week, you can probably skip a little bit of this. We're just going to update this. You could say that if user.isAdmin, this is just pseudocode here. None of this would work in at this moment. Then you could say you could say sorry, I'm just typing it out of sequence. Is it? Can't remember what the dirty syntax is, but like, I think it'd be something like suspended at changed. It'd be something like that. There's something built into Rails to tell you whether a value's changed. Oh no, it wouldn't be that, would it? It'd be in the params, because it would be like suspended or something like that. So you could maybe add a checkbox to a form and call it suspended, and only if that was set to true and the user is an admin do you then populate that value, and then you would come in and say that could then be save. Well, you would have to do yeah, I think that would get you there, so roughly. So what have we just coded out here? So basically, it's like this is an optional change to an attribute on the channel based on a conditional, an if clause in this controller. We then assign the attributes from the form like we would normally do, and then we save it. Now, the problem here is this would probably work. I mean, this is just rough code, so probably this specific one probably wouldn't work, but you could get this working. And one of the issues from experience that you're going to start to face is that the users that are admins will start to be able to do more things. You might introduce new levels of, someone might be an admin, someone might be a super admin, things like that. And someone might be only able to change certain values at certain times. So this logic can get really complicated really quickly, and that's not obvious when you're first starting, because you're just like, oh no, suspended at is the only one I care about right now, let's just do this here, which does make sense and will work and will get you there. But you are, I think as you go through Rails, you're going to start to bump into times where that's not as effective, just because of the complexity around that thing. So more authorization, more attributes that are allowed to be changed, things like that. So that is not the approach that we're going to take. There's too much risk there for not enough reward. So that takes us back to where we started, basically. So I'm just holding that undo. And you're like, okay, well, great. I now, what you're telling me is I can't use this this controller action. I'm going to, again, I'm not saying you can't do anything, but what we discussed before was maybe having a controller action that was maybe called suspend. And here you would do something like at channel dot suspended at time.now. Well, actually, you wouldn't even, you could just call update. You could just call update, and it would do, and then maybe redirect you somewhere. So that would give you, if you create a new route, and this would give you a new action, which would give you a new path that you could then submit a form to. And it's not looking for any parameters or anything like that. It's just going to perform this one action, and you could do something with authentication. So again, this is just pseudocode. This is just an example where you could say, okay, well, if the user is admin, then do these things, and you could then, or else just redirect them back. So only admins are allowed to do that. So again, this is not the actual code that I would suggest using or anything, but what I'm trying to demonstrate here is this concept of having a different controller action to perform an admin specific thing they can do. And again, it doesn't even have to be admin specific. It could just be another bit of functionality you want to add. But this will, you could make this work. Now, this one is also not the approach we're going to take here. I'm not someone who regularly enjoys adding non-standard controller actions, so I probably wouldn't add a suspend action to a controller, whether it was for admins or even just for the user. There's the things I've bumped into on that are things like where, again, an initial action that can seem very simple, it's just going to do suspend the channel, can really quickly balloon where it's like, oh well, before we suspend it we want to do these 3 or 4 things, and then after we do it we want to do these things, and then actually we do want to allow them to add a suspension note. So we actually do have a bunch of controller params that we care about. So this will probably get you there as well, but is not something that we're going to carry forward. So we've looked at adding some sort of conditional to the update action on the channels controller itself, adding a new action to the channels controller itself, and let's take a look at another option, which is using a different controller altogether. So I think we looked here, we had, this is a namespace controller. So here you can see that we've got a folder called admin, and then we've got within it channels controller. So if you look, that means on the left hand side here, we've actually got 2 channels controllers. That is pretty confusing a little bit, maybe if you're a learner and you're like, wait, I've only just worked with one of these. But what we can do is add an update here, and we can basically lift the whole of this out here. So if you look, I mean, it's performing, this might go to something like admin channel path, so it goes somewhere else. And what you can also then do is say, right, let's lift all of this stuff up. Again, I'm not doing this code. This is just a demo. We're going to come back and actually build our desired implementation later. But what we can then add in here is something like suspended at or something like that. And you can see here, so we were able to update the channel. It's the same channel, it's the same resource under the hood, but we've basically got a new controller where we can do that. And we can also do the same thing we had looked at doing on the root controller, on the channels controller. We could add something like an action here called suspend and do the same thing where we just only allow, we just update the suspended at value. Now, why are we creating another controller to edit a channel? We already have a channels controller. Why are we creating another one? Well, by creating another one, in this case, an admin one, we're basically able to give us another place to go and do our updates. We're also able to do things that we want to do only at the admin level. So for example, we might want to do our authentication in like a before action, or we might want to send different notifications in an after action or something like that. We might want to give you access to a wider range of fields. So we've changed the params here. We might want to let you change more things. And then we don't, in the channels controller, have to worry about that. We only have to worry about it at that quote unquote higher level in the admins controller. So that gives us another place to do that. Now, what we also then took a look at was we actually discussed having 3 levels of control. So we had this idea of the channels controller, and then this idea of having a control panel, which would only be for kind of organization admins, and then where admin was available for like internal super admins. So here we then had our control panel channels controller that would allow us to kind of make basic changes within, if you imagine, maybe you allow kind of normal users to use the channels controller or something like that, but within control panel, it's organization admin, so we can let them add more SEO information or something like that to each channel. And then what we created here was actually a new controller altogether. So let's look at how this would work. Now in here, this is channels And this is going to be the suspensions controller. Okay, so this is weird because now it feels like we're no longer interacting with the channel itself. And notice that I've used a create action here rather than an update or a suspend action. And the concept of something like this is that we are we're basically treating the suspension of the channel as the resource rather than the updating the channel. So we are creating a suspension rather than updating a channel. Now a suspension happens to be updating an attribute on a model, but that doesn't really matter. Like from a controller point of view, all you care about is what's the resource that I really care about. That's kind of I think that's kind of like an idiomatic Rails thing. So here we can then still do the same code. So we can go and do the find channel and all, set channel and all that stuff. So we could still do. Can I copy the one from over here? No, because I didn't save it. So in our thing, we can just do channel update suspended at, and then we can do now. And again, what this could allow us to do is unique authentication on this controller specifically. So we could say, right, before we create a suspension, what are we going to do? Who can access it? Who's allowed to do this? What do we want to do before it? What do we want to do after it? Where do we send the user after they've done a suspension or something like that? Now, so we gain all of those things by doing this. We kind of isolate that suspend functionality. But what we lose is the ability to mix and match suspensions in with other general update functionality, because we are now treating this as its own route, its own action, and we want to only use it for suspension. So that's both a really big helpful thing if you only want to do one thing, where you have a button that says suspend, you click it, it pings this action, it creates a request to this action, and then you respond and redirect the user or do whatever. That's super helpful, but it also means that you're then, it's not as easy to extend it with more functionality and things like that. But it, especially when you're working in like a big update form, you don't want to have a form with like 30 or 40 fields and then say like, okay, well, if this one is clicked, then do that. That's probably not ideal for having its own action. You would only, this works a lot better when there's like a button or a form that is always going to do one thing. That's the context I've tended to use this approach in. And that kind of brings us on to the next step of this, which is in all of these examples, we have been updating the channel and doing the work to update that field on the channel in the controller itself. So we've been using update or save, and we've either been passing in like suspended at as an argument, or we've been passing in the params as an argument and asking it to update there. What we can do is start to separate out the behavior in the controller from the behavior that we are actually trying to make happen. And by that, we could then have even more options. I'm just laying out loads and loads of options, so don't worry if you're not following along too well. I'm just laying out loads of options. What we can start to do is look at moving that. So on our channel model, we can have a method called suspend. And so notice that we're moving that logic now down to the suspend, down to the model, and then we can just take I think update is the new way of doing this. So we can now call this, and instead in our suspensions controller, we can just call channel.suspend. Again, there would be more, these are just examples. There would be code around who can do this and where do we want to redirect the user afterwards. But this is essentially the equivalent code. But we've moved the actual behavior of the suspension down to the model itself. So in this case, a channel can suspend itself by setting that attribute. And this might give us a little bit more functionality in that if we want suspend to do 2 or 3 things, maybe we want it to update 2 or 3 attributes or do more stuff, we give ourselves more flexibility at the controller level, because all we ever have to do is say, hey, channel, please suspend yourself, called .suspend, and we could then maybe start to call that from 2 or 3 different controllers or places or things like that, where once you start to separate out the how from the where, you're giving yourselves more flexibility in kind of the Rails architecture of things. And that's a simple example of that. Now, in this example, suspend probably does work on the channel level as a method on that model, but you don't have to ask the channel to suspend itself. We could actually create somewhere else that does that for the channel. So what we could do, again, I'm just throwing out loads of options of you, so these are all things you can go and research in your own way. I'm just trying to give you some example code for them. We could, for example, create let's namespace this as well. So in Rails, namespacing is as simple as just creating a directory and then popping the file within the directory. So here we could create, again, I haven't really focused on the naming, so this would probably be something more like suspension creator or something like that. So suspender works. Let's just do a quick version of this. Yeah, that's what we really need to have done with the other fields. That would be more a service object thing. Let's suspender.suspend isn't ideal, but you kind of get the gist. So let's say here, to make this more explicit rather than adding ads or accessor or anything like that. I just want to be really explicit in this kind of quick example code. Then we could take the, so this is a new class that we've made, the channel suspender, and we take this out of the channel, so the channel now doesn't know how to suspend itself, but we have this new thing called the suspender, and what we can then do up here is call it channel suspend. And again, let's put these next to each other. So let's close this one. So in our controller, we are creating a suspension, and the way that we're creating that suspension is through a create action. And then rather than the channel knowing anything about how to do that, we're using a channel suspender. So what we're doing here is creating more, I guess they're just layers of abstraction away from the thing that's actually the thing that we're actually trying to do, and the sorry, I'm just gonna check the other screen. And what that allows us to do, hopefully, is give ourselves more flexibility. And hang on, my screen. Sorry, bear with me. Hopefully what that allows us to do is give ourselves more flexibility when we decide where we want to place this code. So that if we change our... oh God, this thing keeps playing music. I'm really sorry, as my browser on my other screen keeps playing music. Cool, okay. Cool. Okay, so if we decide to move that where we place the controllers, we don't have to change the logic elsewhere. We don't have to worry about it being different in 2 or 3 places. So if we keep calling update suspended at in controllers, if we want to do that in 2 or 3 different places, like allow different levels of user kind of user roles to do suspensions, every time we call the functionality in the controller, if we change it by maybe adding a new attribute to what it takes for a channel to be suspended, we have to do that in lots of different places. If we just have this class that is only responsible for suspending something, and we just call that whenever we need to do it, we're basically saying, okay, well, as long as we call that and that thing works, we can call it wherever we like. And by using something like named keywords like channel, if we want to add in something extra, it'll break really obviously and easily in our tests, hopefully, which I haven't written quite yet, to say this is, it's obvious where this is broken and it's easier to make the change later. So that's actually one of the big pros of some of these later suggestions that for the architecture that I've been making, which is it's easier to make a change to it later on by disassociating things and having very kind of encapsulated things in specific places. You're able to make a change to them later without tripping yourself up, which is certainly from my experience of being a learner, one of the bigger pain points of something like Rails, where you're like, damn it, I wish I'd, had other routes to know where to put something or something like that. There are still more options that I'm just not even going to bother covering because we're running a little bit longer on these than I had hoped. So for example, there will be some apps that have an API endpoint where you're updating things through that will only allow some attributes through for different user levels. For example, you could do things more on, I guess you could do things more on the view side and do them. You could have form objects that let you do some of these things along with view hubs. There are so many options that you have for just where can I place this logic of allowing multiple roles to do different things. Again, none of them are right or wrong. There's just different approaches and they all have trade-offs that you will bump into along the way. So hopefully that was followable. You can kind of obviously go back and watch the video a few times if any of them don't make sense. And feel free to ask anything in the video comments or in any of the posts that we put up for this. And let's take a look at actually implementing one of these. How long are we running? Okay, so just up to 40 minutes or so. Okay, let's last thing I wanted to look at was doing the Git stuff. Yeah, let's implement one of these. For real, because let's make some decisions and give ourselves a little let's give ourselves some options. Okay, so let me just go take a look at some code on the other screen. Bear with me just a second. I think I'm good. Okay, fair enough. So we can just do. Okay, cool. So we can go and take a look at. I think what we want to do is let's take a look at this control panel idea. Let's take a look at this control panel. So let's close this. We can knock all this stuff up pretty quickly. So we're not going to save any of this stuff because we test any of it, or nor will we remember quite what any of it is. So let's go and implement some of it for real. Let's take admin away for now. I think we'll come back to it because I think what we'll do is we maybe treat admin as like our like a staff internal admin area, and what we'll do is we'll treat control panel as the area for organization admins. That's as arbitrary as anything else. I mentioned in the last episode, I actually prefer to work with like abstract naming, but that's a real personal preference which other people hate. So control panel at least is descriptive. So we've already got a channels controller that I think had some. Let's get rid of this as well. Don't need this. At the end I was going to come back to do the Git stuff, but what have we actually got in here that can be committed? Okay. And and the branch we're in is this install Tailwind branch. Okay. which is stupid because that's done. Okay, so let's. And what commits are on that? Oh, okay. So the Tailwind stuff can actually be bumped. And so let's in this GitHub app. So again, you can do all this through terminal. I'm just doing it here because I think a user interface is pretty helpful for streaming, just so we can all. Just especially with learners, like having something more helpful than like terminals a bit. Single color, no additional context or anything like that. So let's pick out stuff that we think is related to that Tailwind stuff, and we can go back and maybe we'll do another one of those homework editions where we rebase it. So that is related to the Tailwind thing. No, that's not. That is. Just these two. Probably something in the show view. Yeah, so this is how you do partial staging in this app. You actually just click and select and they go blue. And so these two, and you get like a little partial tick on the left here. So these two lines are staged, and these two, because they're green or red, are not staged, which is not obvious. I do prefer like something like source tree for that, where you have like two blocks. I wonder if there's anything in preferences. Is it like a I haven't looked at any of this stuff yet. No, it's a really basic app. It doesn't really do anything. So that's like non-obvious, but then okay, it works, I guess. So let's just do a quick web commit for those. So final. Get custom font working in. It's not just get custom font and base styles working in Tailwind. Okay. You also don't get any line length restrictions in here, which is kind of annoying. Would I expect to see that. Okay. Well, let's go back and yeah, let's go back and do these commits now then pretty quickly. He says having no memory of any of this stuff. Okay, so that's coming up. Those we don't need yet because we're working on those now. This is edit and update, so we do want that. We're so gonna end up with one commit for each. Well, it's pretty simple. We don't really. Okay, so let's do. Let's do these. Install pry. Rails controller testing. Yeah, I think that commit message is longer than I would normally have. Is that the 3 we added? No. Bit of matches, we did that previously. Factory bot. Okay, cool. So they're in. So we can do the migration last actually, because we didn't need or care about that until we'd already done others. So we added the factory gem, and then we can actually put these 3 together. So this is just rough stuff. So we can say add factory bot factories and initial config. I would normally do the controller actions as different. Each one is a different commit. Let's do that as a commit as well. So whip. Add Rails flash messages to application layout. Then we're going to come back and rebase all this. Just separating them out for now. So if we did all those actions, it would be that one not necessarily, that. So this would be add, edit and update to channels controller, and then here we would have, I think I forgot to put that one as a whip. Add link to channels, edit view from show view. That we're about to work on, and then here we added the field that we're using as the example to suspect the channel. Again, there are multiple ways of doing this. So this would be add integration for integration to add suspended app to. Cool, and that leaves us with the ones here. Okay, so sorry about that. I was going to do that right at the end, but let's just clear that up, and then we can do a homework call or something to get back. Tidy that up, make it a pull request, and merge it in. Because it is Hacktoberfest or whatever it's called, so people are doing loads of pull requests at the moment. Which is good. Cool. Okay, so let's do our control panel channels controller. So let's take a look at how this might work then. So we want to go into something like roots. And so this is another thing that I think is interesting for Len, is this concept of having multiple controllers where you can edit the attributes of a resource. Is that you're like, well, I've already got my channels controller. How do I give myself more places? So what we can do here is I've seen this done several different ways. I've got here. Can you just use namespace, or do you have to use other things? Bear with me just a second. I'm going to go take a look at a couple of examples of this. One here. One here. I should really go and find some open source ones, but I don't think we want to spend time doing that. I just want to, I'm just looking in some private repos for some examples. I think namespace will give us everything we need by the looks of this. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we can do namespace, control panel, but we want the path to be control panel one word. And so that then gives us this like new area. I mean, it's a namespace, so like it's a new area where we can do things, and everything's going to be prefixed in that namespace with /control panel. But what it means is we can now copy something like this, and maybe we only want to do the show, just to give us an example. But that gives us our namespace, and then if we jump back to our app, and we go to, actually let's make a new one here. Re-upload. Yeah, I just had a comment on one of the YouTube videos, but it's not. Not a live channel. I think he might be asking for this channel. Just bear with me in case someone is asking. The link to do this. Sorry about this. I like the idea that someone's interested in how to do this stuff and it doesn't work for them. If you're ever interested in doing any YouTube stuff, the YouTube UI is interminable. Like, it's really not helpful. Here we go. Oh, so is that because I had a small stream, so I just replied to that. Sorry about this, I'm just going to reply to him. Available here, and then I'm going to give him this URL. And then I'm going to remove that other video. In a second, sorry, the stream went wrong this morning first thing. It went to the wrong thing, so I actually have a 38-second video of the wrong thing. Hopefully I can actually delete that one, but then it doesn't let me delete everything straight away. So let's do that. And then make that unlisted actually, so we just edit that. Sorry, I know this is really annoying if you're watching along and want to see these controllers, but this is... Make that unlisted so it doesn't show up. Cool. So that solves that problem. So hopefully he then finds this link at some point. Cool. Okay, so that gives us, so we can do Rails info roots. No, it's Rails info roots. And what we should have is our control panel channels. So you can see from adding this namespace that we now have a prefixed path for use internally. So it's control panel channel path. Maybe control panel is a bit long. I've never actually used that before, but just looking at it, that could get lengthy. Again, another reason why I quite like abstract names, because you can choose 4-character ones. You can see that the URL is also prefixed with control panel, and the controller that the URL will route to is control panel channels show. So super helpful, and we still have further down our normal channel path, so the one that's not in the namespace. So that allows us to do everything we need in 2 separate places. So we need to build the corresponding action. So in here, if we try to get to that at the moment, so we know we have channel 1, but if we have channel 1, let's go to our show view. But then we want to go to control panel, in my mouse, control panel, channels 1. The action show could not be found in control panel. So it knows there's a controller there, just can't find the action. So we have to go and create it. Which means, as with everything, we have to go and write some tests first. But luckily, I think we can pretty much just use what we already have. So we have our controller tests. So we have spec controllers. And we want to end up with spec controllers, new folder, control panel. Seriously reconsidering that name even while we're doing this, which is never a good sign. And I'm just going to copy this name. And we're going to create a new file in here. And it's still called channels controller spec. So it is still the channels controller. It is got the same name, but it's just namespace within control panel. So I have seen people that really dislike doing this. And do take things in another direction. Namespacing can be, you can bump into stuff with this. I haven't personally, so I'm going to keep us going on this route, but I am aware that it is not always ideal, so it depends on your use case or something. So I'm going to keep us going down this direction, but I am aware that this is not, like I said earlier, there's no right and wrong solution. So if you're not happy doing it this way, you don't have to. So let's grab this stuff out. Just copying and pasting some code to save myself some time. So now we're describing a different controller. We are actually describing the control panel channels controller. And however, we should have pretty much everything the same. We show view, we would have a channel. So let channel, and we're going to create a factory built one. We're going to test the show view of it, and it should return a successful response. Now, if you notice what's happening here, we are showing we're returning a successful response. So we're saying, yep, you can get to this. We have not at this point added in any functionality around users and user roles. It's just going to work no matter who you are. That's fine for our specific use case, and we're going to come back and add authentication later, but that's the type of test that we would then want to come back and say, no, only admins or whatever organization admins, whatever we end up calling them, should be able to access this action, and that's important. But this test matches our current functionality, which is that we don't have that yet. So we're going to say we expect this to work, and then that test matches the exact behavior, and then when we change the behavior, we'll change the test. At this point, we're not implementing authentication, so I'm not going to write a test that fails and then look to implement it now. I'm going to work on this one as is. So this should return a successful response. We call get show, and that's the show action of the control panel version of this controller. Pass in the ID, which is still fine, and we expect it to have a successful response. Yep, so we're going to save that. We're going to open up our terminal as we did before, and let's get out of the console and let's just run. I don't think we did. Yeah, I don't think we did this before. Yeah, it didn't work, did it? Did we just have to do RSpecs? I couldn't remember which. Did bundle exec work? Yeah, I think I'd done that before and done the wrong one. Cool. So we've got the same error in the test that we got in the browser, which means that, something good is happening when something's giving you the same error. And what we can then do is implement our show view. And if you remember, we don't actually have to implement the show view specifically. Rails will infer it by the presence of a template as the view. We will add one explicitly, because if we add one now, if we add an action here in our this, we will get a no template available error. So again, same idea. We can then add in a folder here called control panel. This means we're now acting in our namespace. We then have to do another folder called channels, and then within that we can do show. So that's a long way down to get us to essentially the same equivalent view of that. So we can say control panel, and at this point we haven't, in this work here, gone and actually loaded a channel, so we'll do that as well while we're here. I could go and grab this from the other controller. Now, this is an interesting one. Oh, is that the control panel? So again, we'll take this. So this is still unscoped, the find channel. So basically what we're doing is allowing any ID to be passed into the URL, and that ID to be used in the lookup and then to return that channel. That is not ideal in something like an admin area. You probably, you're going to limit access to who has it based on some sort of authentication, and then you're probably going to scope the type of channel they can get to, for example, channels within their organization. So these are all things you would normally do. We're just not going to do them at this stage. So as long as we're aware that we're skipping over them, that's fine. And then we want, I am just going to lift this just to save on typing. We can set up a before action, which means our channel will get loaded. So in here, we should now have our channel. And in here, we should then be able to do just a smaller header, and we can do at channel name. We might run out of time a little bit if we refresh this. Right, so now we have two channel show views. One within, for the normal users, that's just /channel, and then we have /control panel /channel /1. Within our namespace, we now have two places where we are showing the same resource. And the same logic will apply when we are doing our edit and update. Now, I do kind of want to... there. So within here, what we had... oh, actually, I suppose we could do our suspensions. So what we could look at doing is doing something like our suspensions controller. That'll just, if we just do that to round off this week. So let's just do a whip commit now. Github desktop, we can just say, are these pre-selected? That's weird. Why has it only selected some of them? I guess it just does any new changes. Okay, so we've done a quick test for the show, added a show view, added in the show, like that, and we don't care about that. So whip add show view for control panel channels controller. Yeah, really not in love with that. Yeah, again, I probably wouldn't do this on this branch either. I'm just working pretty quickly, and I'll come back and tidy these up. So let's explore that last option we had. So we've now got this concept of having our channel in here as a resource. What we can then do in here is say, right, we can show this channel, but what we can also do in here is then do a resource of a suspension. And we are going to have only create. And I think I've got that right. So this is singular. So there's no S on the end of this one. So we've got resources as plural. And resource, I think that gives me the path I'm looking for. Let's go take a look. Here. Yep. And it gets me. Yeah. Cool. So we have control panel, channels, channel ID, suspension, and so we then don't have. I suppose we wouldn't have one for create anyway, but we wouldn't have an ID on the ender because we were just using singular. So if you notice, we're still within our namespace, control panel, still within channels. So look at how many layers down we are: namespace, resources, and then within our resource, we're then adding a suspension. So this is all about this original question of where do we give ourselves multiple places to perform these actions. So now we've got the specific place where we do the suspension, but it is in this whole new controller and new action idea. So we've only given ourselves one place we can do it. So if we had a long form with 20 or 30 fields and one of them was, do I want to suspend this as a tick box, this wouldn't be an ideal approach, but we don't want that for suspension. We're just going to have a button that says suspend. So let's do our last test here. So we're going to add in another folder within our spec controllers, control panel, channels, and then we get a new file. We're going to say suspensions controller spec, and I think we can lift out. Again, you probably don't want to be copying and pasting because it just leads to errors, but trying to work quickly. It should suspend the channel. Fine. Not ideal, but where we go in here? Suspended. I'm writing my test before we write our code. To not be nil. So basically, when we call the create action, it should suspend the channel. And the only way we have to know that at the moment is if the suspended at field is populated. Come back to that later, and we're just doing a reload because otherwise, I think we'll bump into the same issue we bumped into last week, where the instance of the channel that we've got won't have been updated. So we can actually test this out. We should totally fail on here. I don't think we've got any of this stuff, so we should have a good old failure. Yep, absolutely nothing working there because we haven't done anything. So let's go get our suspensions controller working. We'll lift all this. Again, more copying and pasting, which you probably don't want to do. But just working quickly on a Sunday morning. So now we've got that. Does that at least give us a different failure? No root matches it. Because it's not called ID anymore, is it? It's called channel ID. So the actual error you're getting there is there's no action here because it's passing, it's saying, hey, this is the action you've given me, this is the control you've given me, and this is the parameters you've given me, ID. But if we actually jump over and look at the roots we had earlier, it's not looking for ID, it's looking for channel ID. So there's a mismatch in what it's being handed there. I think if we update in the suspensions control here, that would become channel ID. And then I think that this would become channel ID as well. Get a different failure now. Oh, okay, that's not ideal. So action create channel ID as one, controller, control panel, channel suspensions. So again, just a control panel. Ah, okay. So it's actually control panel suspensions that it's going to, but the test has it going to control panel channels suspension. Oh, okay. Is that because of that? No. I thought they would be namespace with those even with the controller. Okay, right, so it's if you do all of it, channels, okay, so I only want it on that one. So I'm actually specifying the module that I want. I actually want suspension under channels so that it's not kind of when I look at those controllers, I can tell it's within control panel, within channels, within suspension. So Rails is saving me there. It's saving me a bunch of typing and whatnot by giving me less to do. But I actually do want to specify that the suspensions controller sits within a folder kind of within a namespace called channels within control panel. So that's why that test was then failing. So hopefully, but the channel ID stuff is still valid. So hopefully now if I do this, nope, I'm still way off. Control panel, channels, suspensions. Okay, well, this is good. Control panel, suspension. Okay. So now I did still want it to be singular. Nil and got nil. Okay, actually, now that I'm doing this resource suspension, suspensions controller. Yep. So that's singular. This is where you can really get yourself tripped up with Rails being just a big giant naming engine. So you've got suspension, but the controller remains called suspensions, and it's because we've used a singular for resource here. Because it doesn't have an ID itself. The suspension, there is no suspension ID 1, 2, 3 or anything like that. The suspension simply is created against the channel, and we don't care about the ID of it. So again, these are all fairly advanced bits and bobs, I guess. If you're on that learner thing, we're still following this concept of putting something elsewhere, but hopefully some of this is making sense as you're following along. I'm just trying to get this a little bit rushed towards the end just to get something working. Okay, so what we now have is that the path all works, but it just doesn't actually update the thing we want it to update. So let's let it do that now, and that goes back all the way to the code we had earlier, and we just want to set the suspended at value as the time. And so I think we should hopefully get a passing test at this point. Great. So our test says when you hit this controller action, you should suspend the channel, and that works. So that all that lends us to do is on our show view in our control panel, what we're going to do is we're going to add in a quick. Let's do a really dumb conditional. We'll just say if yeah, we can just do so. Again, we come back and add some other methods later. So if the channel is suspended at, it has a suspended at value, we can say suspended, and if it doesn't, we can say valid, for example. So then let's jump back over to our view. Oops. These don't need to be ERB, just words. Cool, so this channel is the channel every Sunday is valid, but what we can then give ourselves is button 4, I think will work. And we can give ourselves the path. I don't think it should be called the next, but I'm just going to do this now just to get this working. And I'm doing this off the top of my head. I don't think this will work. Let's see. Oh, okay, so that is the wrong path. Ah, yeah, excellent. Okay, good. I thought that was the wrong path. Cool. Again, I'm skipping over a bunch of stuff there. What I was looking for. Oh, but I didn't give it any. So I think what this will give us. So we now have our suspend button, despite the fact that it doesn't look like a button, but that's because. Actually, we can go and just to make this look cool at the end. We can just go and steal the all the CSS that we took from this thing. And take all of this, and we'll work out how to make that a bit more normal later. We should give ourselves a nice button. Cool. And what button 2 should give us is basically a whole form. So if you have something like a controller action that you want to hit that just performs this one thing, you actually don't have to write the entire form around it. Rails will give that to you. So this will has created a form for us. It's set the method to post, which we specified here, because we wanted to trigger that create action, and it's given it the path. It's created a button for us with all the class values that we put in and the value, and then it's actually put in the authenticity token for all of the CSRF stuff as well. So Rails gives you that with button 2. So you have a single button that represents an entire form, which is super helpful. And you can actually, I think you can put in secret hidden, more hidden attributes if you need the button thing to do more stuff, but I can't remember. So ideally, what should happen? Actually, let's have it do the redirect as well. Let's be a little bit fancy at the end. So in the suspension, we actually want to do the suspension. And then we're actually going to do the redirect to, so it will show us the correct value at the end, and we want that to go to control panel channel path with this channel. I actually think it would work if we left off at channel, because I think no, maybe it wouldn't, because it's the suspension controller. So we want to go here, and we could also add well, we could actually add a flash, which we did before as well. So we're lifting all of our stuff we had elsewhere. Just the same has been suspended. So again, this is something where we can hopefully now come back in here. We have a channel called Every Sunday, and the only edit functionality we're giving the admins is the suspend functionality. If we go back to our view for normal users, we still have our normal show view. We have our edit channel view with title and description, and they can update this. So again, we can add in another exclamation mark, update it. It's now got 2 names. It's been updated. Come back in here and we see the extra one. And hopefully what should happen if we now click on this suspend button is it's now been suspended. And nothing will actually happen because we haven't asked it to do anything. But if we refresh it, that's been stored in the database, and so this channel has now been suspended. So this is a piece of functionality that we only made available within this namespace, and it doesn't affect this at all. But we can then decide at this level how we want that to happen. So we ran through a bunch of different options as to how we can do that. We then implemented with this idea of having namespace controllers, and in the end we just popped a create action on one of those controllers. So that's a fairly little bit contrived example, but we can kind of take that further forward, and we looked at some of the pros and cons along the way. So hopefully that was followable. Let me know if you have any questions. Next week, I think what we'll try and do is I'm going to try and find some time during the week just to, let me jump over, hide all of that stuff away. So what I'm hoping to do during the week is find a little bit of time to do some user interface design. I don't know if I'll be able to do a homework edition of that, but I think that would be kind of interesting. I'm actually not against doing a whole Sunday club just about the UI design, like in Sketch or something like that. I think that'd be pretty interesting. And then once we have that, I think we can then finalize some of these things. I just wanted to get that initial, how are we going to structure this out of the way, and we can work out what methods and things we need. I hope everyone has a great Sunday if you're watching this today, and have a great day whenever you are catching up on this. Again, if there's anything you want to know specifically, just ask in the comments. Thank you to everyone who has reached out so far, and if there's anything you want to kind of look at different approaches to, just reach out and let us know. But please also let other people know about the channel if you get a chance. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks a lot.